Welcome to the Creating Databases for Statutorily Mandated Reports webinar. All lines have been placed on listen-only mode to provide favorable sound quality during today's presentation. It is now my pleasure to turn the floor over to Mary Cam. Ma'am, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to the National Conference of State Legislatures webinar, Creating Databases for Statutorily Mandated Reports, sponsored by the Legislative Research Library and Staff Section. My name is Mary Camp, and I am the Director of the Texas Legislative Reference Library and Chair of the Legislative Research Library and Staff Section. I will be moderating today's webinar. During the legislative process, state legislators enact hundreds of bills. Many of these bills often call for a report to be written so that the legislature can gauge the impact of the enacted legislation and to keep legislators informed of how agencies are implementing state laws. Legislative libraries are often called upon to be the repository for these reports, sometimes in statute or by practice. With all these reports being written, a few states have created databases to manage the archival and retention of the reports. These databases can assist large or small libraries effectively manage their resources and allow for quick access for our users, but these databases do require staff time to maintain. Today's webinar will offer strategies for legislative libraries and legislative staff that are interested in creating searchable databases on statutorily mandated reports. States have faced different issues in developing these databases, and this webinar will help to eliminate these issues and for states that are thinking about developing similar databases, using example databases from Connecticut, Minnesota, and Colorado. It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers for the program today. As you have the biographies on the screen for each of the presenters, I will provide only a brief introductory remark about each of them before each presentation. We will have three speakers for this program: Jennifer Bernier, David Schmicke, and Gay Resch. Jennifer works at the Connecticut Legislative Library, where her duties focus on the reference, indexing, and collecting mandated reports. She earned her master's in Library and Information Science from Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge. Jennifer?
Connecticut's Legislative Library began in the 1970s when nonpartisan offices were created in the Connecticut Legislative Branch. Starting with a single librarian position, we've grown to a staff of 3 librarians and 1 paraprofessional. Our duties include the traditional library tasks, as well as tracking appointments to boards and commissions, indexing various nonpartisan office documents, compiling statistical data about legislators and legislative sessions, and of course, tracking mandated reports. When asked why we should get a copy of a report, we always cite the Connecticut General Statute, Section 11-4A. While the Legislative Library is not mentioned in the statute, it resides within the Office of Legislative Research for administrative purposes. Sometimes there are individuals that still refuse to send reports to the library since we're not specifically mentioned, but we work very closely with OLR to get a copy from their researchers. In addition, since at least the 1990s, we've worked very closely with the Connecticut State Library staff to collect reports, notifying each other about both the passage of mandates and the receipt of reports. Collecting Connecticut's mandated reports predates my tenure at the Legislative Library, but from documents left by my predecessor, it was a very informal approach. In 1995, I developed an index card system that contains the 94 mandates. Index cards were arranged by the year the report was due, then by month. Any notes I took on conversations with the agency liaison were written on the back of the index cards. If I ran out of room, I would staple a second card to the original, and after my first few phone calls, I realized the need to have a lot of data close at hand. So in addition to having the due date and frequency of the report, the author and a description of the report, I made note of the act or statute requiring the report down to the subsection, the names of the committees in the legislature that were to receive the report, etc. In 1997, when the Connecticut General Assembly purchased PCs for each staff person's desk, we became a Microsoft shop. Since I wanted to move the index card system to the computer, I spoke with one of our IT staff who said Access was the program to use. The choice was made with little regard for other programs that were available, mostly because this was a person I trusted, but also because there was little money to purchase anything else, and unless we used a Microsoft product, there would be little expertise to help us. What you see here is the main table's design view, so you can see the fields I use and a description of the field. Because my system was based on index cards, I had a basic format to follow when I entered my data. I added some fields that were helpful, including the date I last contacted the liaison, let's see, which is here. This purple arrow is pointing right to it. Through the years, I've added fields like web address and law, and you can see that down here where it's got the website, and up here where I'm asked put in the text of the mandate. I have also added fields to respond directly to questions about the database. For example, the branch task force field was added just this year so our paperless task force could find out how many reports are being written by the state government each year, presumably so they can consider the elimination and consolidation of reports. One of the most important fields I have is never done. This is a yes/no field which I use to indicate that even if the report is active, I should not try to collect the report. Usually this is because I've been discreetly given some information that it won't be done. Eventually, I discovered the use of relationships in an Access database. So I pulled some data out of the original table and created several lookup tables. Please forgive me while I wait for the, I might actually go forward too, I apologize. Amongst other things, I pulled out the data on the recipients, which would be the committees that are to receive the report, or the governor's office. The frequency of the report was also something that was pulled out. I'm sorry, here you go. Here's the recipients and here's the frequency codes. And finally, I had pulled out the agency liaison information, but I've not kept up that information because the data changes so quickly. Process and acquisition. We attempt to collect all reports that would apply under 11-4A, which is basically any report by any state agency, including quasi-public. The judicial branch or executive branch agencies, boards, commissions, or task forces, advisory panels, etc., created by legislation. In addition, we collect reports required by executive order. We also try to read the major press releases of each branch and catch all those boards, even though they aren't typically mandated in the true sense of the word. We do not make a habit of collecting reports by municipalities. And also, if each agency or each municipality is to write something, we generally don't collect it. An exception to the each agency rule is that we are going to collect all agency reports required by Public Act 11-150, Section 17, which requires each agency to create a report that lists all the state and federally mandated reports. Presumably, this is so the legislature can look to either eliminate or combine some reporting requirements. But we'll have to wait until the 2012 session to see what becomes of this project. Finding mandates is one of the most difficult tasks we have. Finding a report requirement is not an exact science, as we cannot search the Act for the word report or plan, because sometimes the mandate says a group will present findings. This is where working with the Connecticut State Library staff has become invaluable. It gives us another set of eyes to review legislation, and looking for the report mandates is a frustrating task because no matter how many are found, there's always one that's missed. It should be noted that we have not conducted a wholesale project to add all existing mandates and statutes. Rather, we're adding reports to the database as we've discovered them in a public and special acts passed each year. How reports are collected. As for how reports are collected, we follow this basic model, but there are always exceptions. At any time, I could either get a copy of the report and wind up chasing down a report in an odd way. Basically, I run a query on the database, refined after many years of trial and error, review our House and Senate journals, which publish a notification of any reports of the clerk's offices have received and the name of the committee to which the report was sent. I then confirm the report has not already been received and search our card catalog in the web, all of this before I consider contacting the author. It's also important to note that since the staff of our state auditors found that I track reports, they often will discover a report on my list and send it to me, or more likely have the agency send the report. It's getting into my details a bit, but here's the design view of the query I used. I thought it was important to show here because it took me so long to develop. As I prepared for this project, this webinar, it hit me that I only query on a few fields. Besides making sure that the report is active, which is the one part of the query is not shown here, I'm really only checking on when the report was due and when I last attempted to find the report. I try to give the agency 15 days to submit the report, so I wouldn't run a September 1st query like this until September 15th or so. Also, the 3 columns I search on are the date I last checked the card catalog and the date I last checked the internet. And finally, the date I last contacted someone to find the report. The first 2 columns help me fudge the date I'm looking for the report, while also providing a checklist of what I need to do before contacting the agency. Running the query on the date I last contacted the agency makes sure I'm not an unreasonable pest to the agency liaison. When I'm looking for a report, I will have this form on my screen. This form gives me all the information I need to look for a report. And except for the cycle in which I'm indexing the Public Act Summary Book, you'll probably find this Access file open on my desktop at any time, as I'm constantly reviewing and inputting data. Who is authorized to input? While everyone in the Legislative Library has access to the database, I've probably put the fear of God into everyone about messing with my database. There have been enough times that I have inadvertently made a global error, and people have seen me all but pull my hair out that they're terrified to get into it. Still, I did make our most junior librarian add all the data from my old index cards into the database when she first started. To date, she hasn't taken over the task of collecting these reports, but she is at least comfortable using the database. Searching our database is limited to either sorting by column in the table, my preferred method, using the canned searches I've created, as you've seen here, or asking me to create a new query. This screen shows all the queries I've run in the past, as I tend not to delete them. Once a query gives the desired result, Access allows users to make a report. And this is an example of a report I've made from one of my canned searches. It's also an example of a page from a report I might send to one of our agencies. By now, most of our agency liaisons are used to reading the report to extract information that will help them find the report. It has the basic details. What's great about the Access report is that I can send it to them in either a Word or a PDF format, so the person who receives my list can just print it out and make the notes they need and send it back to me. The more experienced liaisons know that all I need is the ID number to reference the proper report and return to me a list of the ID numbers with the corresponding information. Things to consider. While I had the advice and support on general use of Access, at the time the database was created, I did it on my own. Because I am so confident in my abilities and knowledge of the database, I can cause my own problems and I can be very dangerous. My database was not set up by our IT department, and therefore I have no technical support when it doesn't act the way I expect. Were I to be given the time and expertise of our IT department to redo this database, I'd probably redo it in a heartbeat. Data consistency is also very hard to maintain in our database. I do actually have a manual that I wrote on how to input data, but every now and again I get fooled into believing my memory is infallible. And citing to the Public and Special Act is an excellent example of my biggest challenge because I forget to enter lead zeros so the field will sort properly. Repealed mandates. It's taken me a while to determine a consistent way to treat repealed mandates. For now, I put repealed in front of the act or statute citation as well as in front of the law field, but I leave both the statute and the text of the law in the database. Since we've not had a wholesale recodification of our statutes, it works well. Agency name changes. This year, Connecticut has changed many agency names and merged others into new agencies. I've been struggling with how to handle this into the database, not to mention having to remember all the new acronyms. It doesn't help that there are a few dismembered agencies involved in the shift that are now parts of 3 separate entities. I have even so far this year had a liaison ask me which of the successor agencies is responsible for which report. It's going to be a mess come 2012. Catalog coordination. I wish there was a way to automatically feed information from my database right into the catalog. Ideally, there would be an order module to our catalog software that we could use for tracking reports, but as yet, I've not seen one that meets all our needs. I'm just as likely to need a copy of the report as to need information on how we acquired the report or how we couldn't acquire the report. For that reason, we try to enter limited catalog information into the database. This makes it easier to get from the database to the catalog, but I sure wish there was a way for a more smooth transition to get from the catalog back to the database. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next, we have David. David Schmecke is the Collection Services Manager of the Minnesota Legislative Reference Library. He earned his MLIS from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1991. David?
Thank you. The Minnesota Legislative Reference Library was created in 1969 by an act of the legislature and initially consisted of 2 staff. In addition to serving the information needs of the legislature, and to a lesser extent, the public at large, we are also designated as the state depository for all state agency publications. Today, the library staff employs a staff of 13, including 4 IT staff working on system administration, database design, and web development. Our current print collection consists of over 50,000 volumes, of which roughly half are state agency publications. By statute, state agencies are required to send the library copies of everything they publish. The depository requirement is stated in 2 separate statutes. In Minnesota Statute 3.302, it states we receive them automatically, although in reality, we often have to ask for the reports. Some agencies are very good at routinely sending us their publications, others are not. Notice that 3.302 also states without cost. The without cost clause has come in handy in a few cases where an agency has wanted to charge us for a publication. Minnesota Statute 3.195 requires that 2 copies of a report to the legislature be sent to the library, in addition to making it available electronically. At one time, agencies were required to submit 12 copies of reports to the library. This was reduced to 10 and then to 6 copies. In 2009, Chapter 32 of Minnesota Session Laws was passed that, in addition to a few other things, reduced the number of submitted documents to the library from 6 to 2 and required an electronic copy to be submitted by the agencies. The library supported this bill. The electronic copy component of Statute 3.195 is important to the library since starting in 2003, we electronically archive all state documents we receive. We still scan a few reports that are not sent to us electronically, despite the statutory requirement. The tracking and acquisitions of mandated reports was taking place long before I started at the Legislative Reference Library in 1997. Zona DeWitt, starting in 1969, was a founding staffer who tirelessly tracked mandated reports using a paper notebook system using date tabs. At Zona's retirement in 1993, then Director Marilyn Cathcart said it was estimated that Zona scanned over 10,000 session laws during her tenure. Not only did Zona track mandated reports with this system, she also tracked non-mandated reports. Unfortunately, none of these tracking notebooks survive today as a historical artifact. The library started using an Access database to actively track and request mandated reports starting in 1999. Session law mandates for 1997 to present have been routinely entered, although a few mandates from older years have been entered retrospectively. Currently, after each legislative session, a staff member scans through each session law looking for report mandates. The staff member looks for anything that looks like it might result in a report. Sometimes it's clear, other times it's not. We err on the side of caution, and if it looks the littlest bit like a report, it's marked for tracking. These mandates are flagged with a Post-it note, and our acquisition staff then enter the mandate information into the database. The acquisitions database was the library's first database, and that is probably why it took 3 years to develop. It would probably take less time to develop now based on staff experience with databases. Also, the acquisitions database is used for much more than just mandated reports, and this contributed to its development time. Purging of data was important in the early life of the database due to memory size concerns. We purged all completed mandates. Records of recurring and unfilled mandates would not be purged. By 2005, memory was not as big an issue, and purging ceased, both to save time and the fact that the older data still has some value. In addition to mandates, we use the same database to track all items received, orders placed, consultants' reports, suppliers, and periodicals. We continue to enhance functionality to all aspects of our database. For example, in 2009, we replaced our periodical Cardex system with an electronic check-in system. The database client search form is very simple. Staff can search by statute, session law, agency, or description. The description is usually the language describing the report as written in the session law mandate. The description field will search truncated words provided there in the correct word order. By clicking the Add button, a blank mandate record will be pulled up for data entry. I'll show an example of a mandate record as the results of a search for a specific record. For example, let's say we want to search for a report mandated by 2009 Laws of Minnesota, Chapter 172, regarding a volunteer working group on Dakota and Ojibwe language revitalization and preservation. Since I already know the session law information for the report, I only need to plug in the relevant information in the law boxes and click Search. The search results screen will list matching records. In my example, we retrieved only one record, but if there were multiple results, they would be listed in the session law order. A mandate record is opened by double-clicking in either the law or the statute box. This is an example of a mandate record, illustrating the fields used in the mandate table. This is a completed record that is the result of a search. As I stated earlier, if staff were adding a new record, the form would be the same, but the fields would be blank. Required fields are in red. Most of the fields are from data taken directly from the mandate law, agency, description, due date, etc. On occasion, mandated reports do not have a due date specified in session law. In those cases, we often assign a best guess date. On the bottom of the record, you will see fields for contacted. This records the dates that we send letters requesting the report from the agencies. If for some reason the agency did not do the report or it was going to be late, we would put that information in the public notes field. If a legislator or staff wishes to be notified when a report arrives, we put that request in the staff notes field to protect patron confidentiality. We have added fields over the course of time as necessary. Initially, we just had one notes field. There were times this field was used for notes we may not want non-staff to see. The public notes field was added so information could display on any reports we may generate for non-library staff. Other useful fields we have added after the database's debut were repealed, with a repealed notes field, active, and topics. The topics field was added and developed in 2010, but is not in full use yet. The reason it was added was because we often receive requests for lists of mandated reports to be completed that deal with, for example, energy. A mandated energy report could be required of Minnesota's Department of Commerce, Trade and Economic Development, or possibly the Department of Agriculture, to name a few. The description field may not always contain the term energy, so this new field is an attempt to bring those mandates together into one report. A variety of canned reports are available. The mandate list by agency is a popular one that we get requests from legislators and the agencies themselves. Our IT staff can also provide custom reports upon request. It is the first report that is important to our mandated report tracking process. This report will print claim letters on letterhead that we mail to our agency contacts. These letters are generated 4 times a year and are based on the contact date field of the mandate record. If 3 claim letters do not result in the submission of a report, we place a phone call. Most often, reports are sent after the first or second letter. Rarely does it reach the point of having to call an agency contact. Here's an example of the letter we send to agencies and the resulting report. We've tweaked this letter over the years in order to make it easier for the agencies to convey information and send the report to the library. We're currently working on the ability to generate these claim letters by email. In order to do this, the data tables need to be migrated to a SQL server. Once that data migration is complete, we will work on the actual electronic claim letter process. The first thing we'll need to do is make sure that we have accurate email addresses for all our contacts. In addition to the form searching in the database, we have recently developed a web interface that is currently available only to library staff. We have plans to make a version publicly available in the near future. As you can see, the search capabilities are greatly increased from the staff client query form I showed earlier. Additional searches in the web interface include topics, notes, OCLC numbers, etc. Keyword searching is also enhanced in the description field. We've also included the ability to limit searches by due dates, receive dates, or whether it's a recurring report. Before this can be made publicly available, there are a few issues that need to be corrected before we will be comfortable with general release. Our biggest concern with public access is a 12-year legacy of varying agency names and inconsistent input. We're currently working on data cleanup so that this web interface can be released outside the library. Here's the result of the web interface search for that Dakota and Ojibwe language report we looked at earlier, and the resulting web interface item record. An added feature on a web record is the Send Jess Info About This button. Jess is our acquisitions person, and library staff can send her a note from anywhere in the library if they have a question or information about a mandated report. This feature, among a few others, would be suppressed in the public interface. Clicking the Jess Info About This button opens an email form box. The email she receives is automatically populated with the mandate information, allowing other staff to send off a quick note. Things to consider. There are a few things to consider when developing a mandates database. First, data entry and authority control. When the database was developed 14 years ago, a data dictionary was created, and the format chosen for agencies was min period, department period of, and then the name of the agency. For example, the Minnesota Department of Transportation. This works okay when staff have access and know the format. However, as we move to a web-based public access format, we've come to realize that this format will cause problems. The public won't know what the format is. When the database was designed in 1997, it was intended to be an internal staff tool. Were we to design it today, we would take public access into consideration from the start. We're currently working on an improved format for agency names and structure of the relationship of divisions within main agencies. Name changes have always been a problem for us also. This is partially due to the program code written during the development of the database. While each agency has a key assigned with a name, all the associated records also inserted the text name of the agency into the record. When an agency name is changed, the linked records won't change automatically. Were we to develop this database today, the code would likely be written differently to change the names dynamically in all related records. Catalog coordination. Our acquisitions process and catalog are completely separate. Our catalog has an acquisitions module that we have chosen not to use since the module cannot accommodate the complexity of mandates. Since our mandates database is currently staff use only, our patrons need to ask for assistance. Our web interface that is currently in development will alleviate this problem, but the acquisitions database will still be separate from our catalog. Staff time, as I stated earlier, our acquisitions database was 3 years in development. Our library has benefited greatly from employing IT staff that collaborate with the librarians and understand both librarianship and the legislative process. Given that acquisitions was our first database and we've created a few others since then, I think development would take less than 3 years than it did 14 years ago. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Next, we have Gay Resch. Gay has been a librarian at the Colorado Joint Legislative Library since 2000. She earned her MLS from the University of Denver and her BA in International Relations from the University of Colorado. Gay?
Thank you. The Colorado Joint Legislative Library is currently staffed by 2 professional librarians who provide nonpartisan and traditional library services and resources to members of the General Assembly and their staffs, Legislative Council and Legal Services staff, other governmental agencies, and the public. The library also maintains the Colorado Joint Legislative Library website and the Colorado Legislator History Database and website, assists users in researching legislative histories, and maintains the required reports database. We always cite to the Information Coordination Act of Title 24, Article 1, Section 136, subsection 9, when asked why we should get a copy of a report. Although the statute requires 6 copies of a report be sent to the library, we now only request to get the electronic version of a report so we can attach it to our database record. We are moving away from a lot of the hard copy aspects and going more to databases in a lot of areas, since the information is then available to staff at their desktops. Next. Collecting Colorado's required reports has generally been a very informal and haphazard approach until this past year. Unlike my colleagues, there was no index card or notebook system for tracking the mandated reports and no formal process for collecting the reports. Our predecessors did not leave any notes on how the reports would be tracked and collected. In 2002, after noticing that there were reports fulfilling statutory requirements coming into the library, we decided to develop a database for listing statutory mandates with a report description. Even though we knew mandate language wasn't standardized, we needed a starting point for finding the mandates. We decided that to begin the database, we would run an electronic search on the word report in the Colorado Revised Statutes. The software that we chose for our database was Lotus Notes, which is the program our legislative bill tracking system is in, as well as most other office databases. In 2010, the role of the database was expanded to include a more proactive approach to collecting the reports and attaching the electronic report to the database record. The reports are no longer cataloged or kept in the collection. Those reports that were in the collection were scanned into PDF format and then attached to the record. Since we had no previous system, we had to design a basic format to follow when inputting the data. The forms design view is shown here so you can see the fields that are used to input data. The fields included our report name, report status, whether it is active or complete, department and/or agency generating the report, the committees who received the report, frequency, the first due date and due date comments, repeal date, statute citation, enacting law, report description, and staff notes. Drop-down menus have been added to provide a set list of departments and committees for consistency and ease of use, and an options bar for frequency. Our committees field not only contains the legislative committees, but also the governor, the attorney general, chief justice, and others who are to receive the report. The report attachment field was added this past year so we can attach the actual scanned report to the record. An example of the drop-down menu for committees is shown here. This screenshot shows how legislative staff see the completed record in read-only format for the annual report concerning districts of innovation. At the bottom of the record, you can see where the PDFs have been attached. Finding mandates in all the bills passed each year is one of the most difficult tasks we have. During session, we run Westclip alerts as an early process for finding potential mandates in bills. Our four most successful queries are successor committees, annual report, written report, and report to the General Assembly. We enter the bill number, statute citation, and bill subject into a tracking report. Problems associated with this approach are reporting requirements being dropped from a bill, the citation for the requirement being changed in a later bill version, and the need for the frequent checking of the bill status. After session, since mandate language isn't standardized, the session laws must be searched for the other varying ways that a mandate can be written. Our data input comes from the information given in the session laws themselves. We are now trying to collect all reports that apply under the Information Coordination Act, which would include statutorily required reports by any state agency, the executive departments, boards and commissions, task force, and advisory panels. Requests for information, RFIs, are also being collected. These are special reports that the Joint Budget Committee requests of the executive departments specific to that department. We do not collect agency-to-agency reports or agency-to-municipality reports. We have several methods for collecting reports. This can be done by searching department websites, receiving copies from departments and agencies, contacting legislative liaisons, and emailing or calling agency contacts. Many departments and agencies do not know of the required report mandate, so we need to do more education and work to better communicate what their reporting responsibilities are. While everyone in the legislative staff has read-only access to the database, only 4 of us are allowed to input to maintain the integrity of the database. However, with that many people inputting, data input can still be inconsistent. To make recommended format changes, an individual in our IT section is assigned that responsibility. The reports can be searched by department, committee, due date, statutory section, frequency, repeal date, and JBC RFI. The following slides show some examples of these views. Using this highlighted search bar, any term in the reports record can be searched. I prefer the method of searching the database by the Colorado Revised Statute citation. With this department view, we hope to generate a report letting the departments know what reports are expected of them. The report can be attached to emails or letters so we don't have to retype a list of what we are requesting. This is also helpful in letting the departmental legislative liaisons know what we are expecting. Legislative committees have asked us to produce a list of the required reports that they should be receiving, and it's very easy to provide using this view. This view was particularly helpful when a legislator requested a list of all reports that are to go by committee to each committee. He was hoping to introduce legislation to reduce the number of reports mandated. The due date view is used to see what reports were collected in the past or that are expected in the future. We can easily check the repeal date view to determine when a report is no longer needed for collection. If a reporting requirement is repealed or if a report has been issued and there is no further requirement, we mark the record complete, but it is still searchable in a completed view in this same database. Identifying the report requirement is the most challenging aspect of developing the mandated reports database. A decision must be made as to what method will be used to track these in your statutes, whether to start at a given point in time or to read through all of the statutes to find all the reports mandated. We are considering approaching the Legislative Drafting Office to see if a reporting requirement could possibly be put in the headnotes in a bill. This would simplify our tracking tremendously. To achieve data consistency, it is necessary to remember how to enter certain names in the form, such as agency names. The more people inputting, the more likely the name will be entered differently. We created a uniform list of department and committee names to avoid having to type them in free form. Initially, like Connecticut, we had to remember to input lead zeros before a statute citation for properly sorting the statute field. However, a new programming code change resolved that problem. As mentioned earlier, our repeal date was established so that we would know when a mandated report was no longer necessary for collection. Our next steps include formalizing a system of contacting the departments and agencies to request reports and developing a public web interface so that the actual scanned required reports are available to the public. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Gay. Patrick?
We're ready to take questions over the phone.
One of the first questions we have is, how much time do you spend maintaining the database, and has it gotten easier over time, and why exactly did you decide to do this? And Jennifer, you want to take this one?
Yes, I'd love to take that one. I created the database because the index cards that we had, it was much like a card catalog where you could kind of drop the whole thing and everything would get out of order. So we wanted to make sure that we had something that's a little bit more solid. Also, we thought it would save time, and I think it's important to note that even my database, setting up the database, your time is very front-loaded. You have to figure out how to set up a table, or perhaps how to work with IT if you're able to get them involved. And I think over time, the whole process has saved me time. But I would still say, given the fact that we've got about 2,000 reports in our database that we track and maintain, some of those are not active, but it still takes a great amount of time to collect the ones that are. There's probably about 1,500 that are still active. I would say that it waxes and wanes. Most of our due dates are going to be in January and February, at which point I'm probably working on the database anywhere from 5 to 7 hours a day, versus the summertime when I'm doing the Public Act Summary Book, not working at it at all. I would say probably a good half of my time is spent trying to collect these reports as we go through the whole season of January to December.
And David, do you want to talk about this one?
Sure. Right now, I mean, probably the most time-consuming thing as far as maintenance of the database is getting those mandates in there. And this year, it was further complicated with a special session and a government shutdown. And what we're running into is some of the reports are due already, and we haven't had time to get the mandates in. So we're kind of trying to play catch-up. We're hopefully going to have that done this week. As far as maintenance goes, we, as I said, we are doing things to enhance access to our database. So our IT staff is spending a lot of time working on those types of tweaks. But we've had this for 14 years, so as far as the general day by day, it's pretty routine. Why did we decide to do this? It's because we weren't getting all the reports that we needed prior to '97, and plus we didn't have a record of it either. So since 1997, if someone comes in and asks for a report that was mandated after that, I can say with pretty good confidence that yes, we should have gotten that report, here it is, or here it isn't because of this reason. Prior to '97, I have to say, if it's in our catalog, we received it. If it's not, then for whatever reason, we didn't receive it. So it has greatly increased our ability to track these and get them into the library and into our collection. That just wasn't able to do with the notebook system prior to that.
All right. Our next question comes from the chat board, and it is, can Access database be made web accessible? Jennifer, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Our parts of our Access database are available to the public. Things that are considered work product are not available. And basically what I would do is, it's actually not available externally, but certainly available internally, and then anyone could ask for the data and it would be given to them through, say, I've never had an FOI request, but something like that. We just kind of picked the fields that were not work product and dumped those out onto the Access database, onto our internal web page, and people were using it. But I think the problem with my database is that it's in Access. It's not in something that looks nice and user-friendly. And as soon as you say the word Access in the Connecticut General Assembly, people get a little concerned because they're used to working in something like Excel, which does something really good for numbers, but doesn't do databases really well. Thank you.
Okay, we have another question out there on the chat. Are any of the library members of OCLC, and do you submit full bibliographic records for these publications to OCLC's database, or only catalog local records? David, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, we are a member of OCLC, and we submit our bibliographic records as part of our cataloging process. What doesn't get there on the OCLC database is some of the local information. And so you will find records on OCLC that, for instance, won't contain the archived URL. Because we don't go back and update when we change records. And we do go back and electronically archive reports retrospectively also, so those won't be on the OCLC database either. But we do have all of our records on OCLC, just there may be more information on our local catalog.
And Jennifer, do you want to talk about that also?
I think, you know, I see the question, and I'm sure the person who created OCLC kind of looks at our catalog and rolls over in their grave, because our catalog is very much a local catalog. We do not belong to OCLC, and we're just as likely to catalog something under the Blue Book as we are to put in its formal title. We are often, when these mandated reports come in, you know, it'll be something like final report is its title. Well, that's not good enough for our card catalog, so we'll make up a title that deals more with my bibliographic record in my Access database. So the answer is no, we're not a member of OCLC, so obviously we don't submit anything, but our card catalog is available internally, and I think because we are able to fudge the record a lot more, we can add in details that our people downstairs will use in order to collect the report. Thank you.
Okay, and Gay, do you have anything to add there?
We're part of OCLC as a searching library. We do not enter any bibliographic records into OCLC.
Okay. We have two more questions out there on the chat, and I'm just going to kind of combine them. One is there a way to determine the overall compliance rate of the issuance of the reports, or even for individual reporting agencies? And with that, how confident are you that you're finding all of the mandated reports? Jennifer.
Okay. I think I'm never confident that we're finding all the reports. I remember a time that the state library actually noticed that money was appropriated, and that's the only reason that they knew that there was a report that was coming, and it completely escaped my notice. And so again, it's a good thing that we have that network with the state librarians. So I'm never confident that we found all the mandated reports. The drafters, not only our legislative commissioner's office, but sometimes legislators who write the laws, call them reports, call them findings, call them any number of things. So you can't do a canned search. You really have to read through every single one, every single act, and every single section of an act in order to make sure you've gotten them. And even at that, we missed the appropriation one. Is there a way to determine the compliance rate? Not really easily in my database, because that's not really why it was set up. I certainly know the agencies that are more compliant than others in my head, but some agencies, as I'm sure all of your states, have had a lot of retirements and layoffs, and they just don't even have the staff to write these reports anymore. And unfortunately, a lot of times those are the agencies that have the mega amounts of reports to write. Thank you.
And Gay, do you have anything you want to add?
I'm not that confident that we are finding all of the mandated reports, despite the numerous ways we have of trying to track them. As far as trying to determine the overall compliance rate, I'd say at this point in time it's low until we really formalize a way to contact the various agencies and departments and make it known about the Information Coordination Act.
Okay. Some other questions we have are, what usage does your database get from staff and then legislators? David, you want to talk about that?
Well, all of our staff, all of our library staff have access to the database. I think probably the staff that work directly in the acquisitions process probably use the database client version of it, whereas the reference librarians are using that staff web version I demonstrated. And as far as outside the library, as I said, we haven't opened up access to that yet. Our goal is to offer it to legislators and their staff, and eventually the public at large, as soon as we work out some of those database issues, such as the agency names. We're just not confident right now that it would be a good product to release publicly, including to our legislators and our staff. But that is our goal: is to get it to the legislators and the agencies so that they can search for what they need or to submit or what's going to be coming in, and hopefully that will be rolled out in the beginning of next year.
And Jennifer?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
What usage does your database get from staff, and then again, what usage by the legislators?
Again, I would say that our database is available internally to all staff, but I have, by accident, made people concerned about getting in because of the times that I have stressed myself out over things that I've done. Our legislators and staff probably don't get into it very much because when you say the word access and people aren't familiar with that program, they get intimidated.
Sure. Okay, next it looks like we have a call-in question. Patrick?
Certainly, and as a reminder, that's *1 on your telephone keypad if you do have a phone question. And our phone question so far we have is from Danielle Boyote. Please state your question.
Hi, I hope everybody can hear me. I was wondering how any of you deal with changes in the reporting requirements. For instance, Nevada, I know they like to move things from one revised statute to another. Do the databases that you maintain only reflect the most current information? And how did you make the decision to either include historical information or reflect only the most current information?
Jennifer, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think I can take this one. I, in my database, only have the law field reflect the most current information, but I do have a notes field which is available to the public, which mentions the year of an act changing the requirement and what it did. Maybe it merely changed who the report goes to, or maybe it changed that the agency has to coordinate with somebody else or anything. That has been a struggle that I've had to deal with because my database really isn't a whole lot of flexible, you know, and I've got to be a little bit creative with some things. As far as checking, like, whether there are updates, one of the screenshots that I included specifically just in case people want a background of one idea is of all the fields that I use. And one of the fields I think that's currently set up is just called 2011, and it's a yes-no field. And when I have a moment to go through all the 2011 acts affecting or statutes affected, I will literally go through each line of my database for all the active reports and check the statute citation to see if any particular act of this year affected the statute. I did last year notice that a particular statute wasn't changed, but it was wholesale moved, and I don't know how I found it, but it was just one of those serendipity kinds of things. Again, I have mentioned a couple times I work closely with the Connecticut State Library, and together we often find these things and notify each other so that both of our databases are kept as up-to-date as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. David, do you have anything to add to that?
That is not much of a problem with Minnesota in that any change to a mandate requirement would require an act of the legislature, and hopefully we would catch it when we scan the session laws after every session. Where it is a bit of a problem is those repeals. So if a statute's repealed, that's mandating something, then we wouldn't catch it in just scanning. We have to check those repeals to see if they have a reporting requirement in our database. Things don't get moved around that much in Minnesota statutes. It's possible there would be a renumbering, but it doesn't happen all that often without a repeal or an act of the legislature, so hopefully we would catch it that way.
Jay, do you have anything to add?
My response is pretty much what David said. We would catch any of the renumbering, hopefully because of a new session law that had been passed.
Okay. Next, we have a question about the electronic report. This is kind of a two-part question. It is, for those reports that are electronic, do you have an electronic submission procedure? Do the databases link directly to that report? And then with that, does anyone have a problem with verifying the digital formats for the report? And how do you deal with the ones that aren't readily in one file or easily printed? Jennifer?
Okay. We do not have a formal submission process for electronic reports, but I think our clerk's offices have begun an investigatory procedure to see how it is that executive agencies in particular can submit reports through some kind of a web page. But that has not yet either gone live or progressed much beyond the investigative procedure. We do not have reports linked into our database. Rather, we save that for the card catalog. And the card catalog does link the reports, but we actually grab the report and bring it into our servers rather than linking it out on the web so that it's not a dead link later on. I'm going to, if I can, combine this with Tracy Kimball's question that's on the internet, which is, how do you deal with varying formats or ones that aren't easily put into a file?
Yes.
We sometimes have the ability to dump all of those reports into a program we have and that spits it out as a PDF document. So that's one of our options. Another is that in our card catalog, our cataloger has been able to basically have 5 different links associated with one report. One copy record is what we call them. And she's done a phenomenal job getting all of those in. There are the occasional reports like our Digestive Administrative Reports, which is something like 40 different links every year. Those kinds of things we've had a real hard time with, and unfortunately we kind of punt that one over to our Connecticut State Library, which is the official document depository for government documents.
Okay, Gay, do you want to talk about that?
We don't have an electronic submission procedure. That is something that we are going to be investigating. Our database links directly to the report by having the record attachment of the PDF format to it. And at this point in time, we don't do anything special to digitally archive the reports.
Okay, our next question is, during the next legislative session, do you plan to ask for any changes in statute for submitting reports to the library? And if so, what sort of change or mandate would you ask and why? David?
Well, we don't have any plans for this next legislative session. As I said in my presentation, during the 2009, we supported a bill that reduced the number of copies that needed to be submitted to us from 6 to 2, and also the requirement that they be done electronically also, which involves either emailing us a copy of it, or often it's just on the agency's website. The reason we went from the 6 copies to 2 is because we used to microfilm everything that we received, and that program went defunct in 2003, and that's when we started archiving electronically. So we didn't need a copy for microfilming anymore. We didn't, and since we were archiving electronically, we didn't need to give out copies to legislators who may want one. So we probably won't be asking for any changes to report legislation next season because we just did it a year ago.
Okay, and Gabe?
We need to get the Information Coordination Act changed as far as what is submitted to the library. As I mentioned earlier, 6 copies of reports are supposedly to be submitted to the library, and now we're only requesting an electronic version, and that needs to be changed. Whether or not we're going to get it submitted this year, we need to find a sponsor for such a bill.
Okay. One final question has just popped up on the chat questions. I guess we have time to do this last one. It's, do any of you encounter any resistance when asking agencies for required reports? If so, what is your advice on how to deal with that? David, do you want to take that one?
We don't encounter really that much resistance. As I mentioned, a couple times I've had agencies want to charge us, and as soon as you show them the statute says that they can't, or that they're also required to give us copies, that's usually enough pressure on them. Actually, probably the opposite happens. I'll get calls from agency staff who are fearful that they didn't get it in on time, and I have to explain to them that we're not the police. We're not going to come and arrest them or anything. So there is actually some fear of the legislature, maybe so to speak, out there that they need to get these in. So we don't really run into that much resistance. Occasionally, when we have that, unfilled mandate, it's due to, we'll contact the agency and they'll say, we didn't do the report because even though we were mandated for it, we weren't funded for it. And they didn't do it. So, what are the consequences of that? Well, if a legislator, then comes looking for it, we'll tell them that the agency didn't do it. But, there's no real policing of these requirements. So, but overall, compliance is pretty good for us.
And Jennifer, do you want to speak to that one?
Yeah, I don't think that we've really offered, or we've encountered any resistance, perhaps, but I think what we've encountered is some of the agencies either don't have the staff to do it, or one of the agencies actually gave an oral report as part of their legislative testimony before their committee, rather than a hard copy report, and it was very interesting to encounter that. And I think the only time that we've really gotten a little bit of their hackles up, if you will, is when we're asking for a report that they say they submitted to the clerk's offices, the clerks give it to the committee gives it to the legislator, and we can't find it anymore. And they'll give me a little bit of backlash about we already submitted it, and I know, but you didn't submit it to me. And as far as advice on how to deal with agencies, I mean, I think I've developed a nice rapport with our liaisons. I don't know if every state has a liaison for each of its agencies, but most of ours do. And we happen to also be one of the few places that has PCs in the building that liaisons can come use to check on the information that's going on in their own agency. So we get to see them and know them, and I think having that friendly rapport has always worked well to getting these things. And sometimes you're just not going to get the report for whatever reason. We can try. I think, again, I keep talking about the Connecticut State Library, but I can't tell you how many times I found a report that they couldn't get, or better, for me anyway, they found a report that I couldn't get. And it's just awesome to be able to have two of us collecting it and certainly notifying the people who have the report that, by the way, did you know there's this other group who's going to be calling you in a couple minutes because my next phone call is to them to tell them to go get it. So that's really been nice, having more than one of us trying to collect it. So thank you.
Okay, that's the end of our questions. Patrick?
Thank you. This concludes today's presentation. We thank you for your participation. You may now disconnect your lines and have a great day.